Welcome to Wordplays at Proctor's for our program on Bamboozled. I'm Kate Detting, one of the producers of Story Circle at Proctor's. Welcome. Bamboozled, as defined by Merriam-Webster, means to deceive by underhanded methods, to dupe, to hoodwink. Today we'll be hearing 8 stories filled with people being bamboozled. And you get to figure out who you want to root for, those being bamboozled or those doing the bamboozling. Now, we will be taping this performance, but your names will not be visible. Zoom is kind that way. We'd like you to be muted during each story as it's being told, but in case you have dogs or any other unexpected visitors traveling through, or your phone rings in the middle of the performance. But at the end of each story, we welcome you to unmute, and you can clap so the teller can hear, or you can not unmute and you can use the deaf hand signal, or you can clap, whatever. We just like you not to be live when the stories are being told. I think that's all we have for introductions. Now, to link the stories together, I asked each of our tellers the same question. If your story was a feeling, what would it feel like? Our first teller, Kate Danaher, coming to us from Florida, by the way, said her story, an Irish folktale, would feel like a stomach ache. And this Irish folktale, it has the name, The Singapore Policeman. Now, I don't know about you, but I want to figure out what the Singapore policeman is doing in Ireland and why she, or someone should feel a stomachache. Kate Danaher.
All right. Now, I suppose I should have looked in the dictionary to see that bamboozled meant an underhanded duping. This is just a... oh, well, what would you say? Just a mistaken duping, right? And it's, although they always say it's a folk tale, I don't want you to think that it's not true. It really happened. Okay. One of the Caseys came home to Ireland after spending 10 years in the Singapore police on a pension of £1 a day. Now, this would be at a time when a man would come home with change out of a shilling after a day's carousing at the races. Feel better with my glasses on. All right. So now, the Singapore policeman, he married an English woman when he was abroad. And so they would have to be put up at the house for a few nights anyway, right? You know, now the home, the ancestral home, was presentable enough and well kept when the mother was alive. But the son who was in it now, the policeman's brother, well, he had the misfortune to marry Hannah Damery. And now Hannah was, as we would say, pure easygoing. The clothes looked like they'd been thrown on her with a pitchfork. And she was sitting in the chair all day long, chewing away, and the children lapdolling all around her. That sort of woman. Well, the neighbors came by to help to put some schlacht, we call it, on the house. The walls were whitewashed inside and out, and green rushes placed at the muddy approaches to the door. Grandma's tick was taken out onto the hedge to air it, the dust rising out of it as it was beaten with the back of a grubber. The sheets were washed to get the flour brand out of them. You know, they used the old flour sacks, you know, to make the sheets. And crockery was borrowed for the table. It was going to be a great feast. All the neighbors were invited. Spare nothing, said Hannah. 'Twas thinking of herself, she was. But nevertheless, she said also she wanted some of that shaky, shivery stuff you ate with a spoon. So trifles and jellies figured largely in the menu. But didn't they forget the hundreds and thousands? Those are those little silvery things, you know, we used to sprinkle on the wedding cakes, you know, little candies. Father Horgan used to call them little spheres of no consequence. Wouldn't they take the joy out of living, those men? Anyway, whatever happened, we don't know. But the wife said she needed the husband to go down into the town to get the hundreds and thousands. And we, again, as I said, we don't know what she did, whether she didn't give him the right information. We don't know. But when he got into town, no one in any of the shops could figure anyway what he was getting at. What did he want? Where did he end up but in a bicycle shop where he bought a carton of ball bearings? And in the evening, these were shaken on the trifle. And the people soon found under their teeth what they couldn't chew. And they couldn't very well spit it out, you know, because with the English lady and all there, although some did make out into the yard to see what the weather was doing. Well, that night and the next morning, people suffered dire pains in their nether regions. And these two women in the morning, they met out at the Holy Well. And one said, Ara Mary, did you have any of Hannah Damery's trifle yesterday evening? Did I, she said, and am I the sorry woman? Up and down all night, the husband was going to go for the priest. Did it have any effect on you? Effect, she said. God help us. I thought it was the appendicitis I was getting, a terrible deadness in my side. And I thought, pardoning your presence, that if I could break a little wind, that it would bring some relief. And so when I leaned over to light the fire, I did. And I shot the cat. That's my story. And that's true. It's not okay.
Oh dear.
That was good.
The consequences of that inaccurate shopping list or the miscommunication and the poor cat. Oh my goodness.
God, I don't know who was bamboozled.
Oh dear. Well, thank you for starting us off in such a explosive way, I guess. Our next teller is David Bain from the greater Salem area, who's told at the cabaret at the Fort Salem Theater, which is thinking about opening up again. Yay.
Good.
He's going to share with us a personal story called the Ozarks. But when I asked him about the feeling, he said, the grit of a Baptist churchyard blown into your sleeping bag. Ooh. David, tell us more.
Well, sometimes things work out, and sometimes there's somebody right there when you need them, and other times there isn't, and so you're kind of bamboozled. How this all started with me was that I had just finished school. I was in Portland, Oregon, and I was standing there, and I didn't have a job, and I didn't know what I was going to do. And my thesis advisor comes up to me, and he says, "Hey, you might be interested in this." And he hands me a one-page photocopy, and it's an invitation to come to a private island off the coast of Georgia and study birds. And this sounded pretty good. Even though I'd never been to Georgia, I wasn't even sure Georgia had a coastline, and I certainly didn't think there were any islands off the coast of Georgia. But I didn't have a car. I had my apartment. I was in Portland. I didn't know how I was going to get to Georgia. So I called my dad, and my dad says, hey, you can buy my car if you want. And I said, okay, great, great, great. So I get a ride share, and I go from Portland, Oregon out to New Hampshire to buy my dad's car. He gives it to me on credit, which is great, for $1,000. And so I spend 3 days, 2 nights, and I get out to Minneapolis. And this is around January, February or so. I spend 2 weeks in Minneapolis. I get enough money to then get on to Portland. I get to Portland, and I pack up my apartment, and I get all my stuff squared away, and things are looking pretty good in my brand new 1970 Volvo. And I figure, well, on my way to Georgia, I'll go down and visit my friend Holly. My friend Holly lived in Palo Alto, down in California. And so I figured I'd drive down the coast, and I got to see the redwoods. It's magnificent, great, wonderful, and all that. And I get down to Palo Alto, and Holly's looking at my finances, and Holly's a little bit worried about my money. And she knows that I'd rather spend money on gas than on food, because if you can't go anywhere, you're not traveling anymore. And what's the point? So she fixes me up this great big jar of spaghetti sauce, nice bright red sauce. She puts a little dill in it, and I'm all set. I'm ready to go. So then I get back in my car, and I drive down and finish out, go through California and get into Arizona. And right around the Grand Canyon, I start to think, man, this is a long ways. This is going to take me a while to get to Georgia. And so I'm looking, and so I get out the map, and I'm sort of looking at the map, and I realize, I'm going to go through the Ozarks. And I figured the Ozarks are pretty special. I'd heard a lot of good things about the people who live in the Ozarks. And there's the Ozark Mountains are there, and there's this mountain lore. And I could find something in the Ozarks that I wouldn't find anywhere else. And I'd be a better person if I could get to the Ozarks. So I got excited. I start to push a little bit. And I get through the Texas Panhandle, and I get into Oklahoma, and I get through Oklahoma, and I get to the other side of Oklahoma, and I cross the border in Arkansas, and everything's looking great. Everything's looking marvelous. Here I am in the Ozark, in Arkansas, and it's the end of the day, and so I start to look for a little place to camp, because I don't want to get too far into Arkansas and miss the Ozarks in the process. So I start to circle around. I find this little Baptist churchyard, this little country church, and you don't want to circle too much, because then some people start to wonder, why does this car keep going by my house over and over again? So I circled around, and then I said, okay, this will work. And I pull in there, and it's in the evening, so nobody can see me. And so I get my sleeping bag, and I stretch my sleeping bag out right next to my car, and get a little candle, light my candle. And I decided I'll write a letter to Holly back in Palo Alto and tell her what a great and wonderful thing the spaghetti sauce was, and let her know where I was. Now, it doesn't do any good to let her know where I am now, because tomorrow I'll be someplace else. But that's still, that's what you do. There's not much else, So, I write my little letter, and I decided to read a little bit. And all of a sudden, out of the dark comes this dog. And this dog, here I am, I'm laying in a sleeping bag next to my car in a Baptist churchyard, and this dog sticks his face right in my face. I'm going like, what the hell is that? You don't want a dog, under these circumstances. And this dog said, and then I realized, this dog's really young. It's an Irish setter, and they got shit for brains. What difference does this make? So I just sort of shoo the dog away, push the dog away, and the dog disappears, and I drop off to sleep. So I'm laying there, and all of a sudden, this wind comes up, this huge wind, and it's blowing this gravel all over the place. And it's blowing, and it's like, oh man, screw this. I don't need it. So I get up, and it's the middle of the night. I don't know what time it is, but it's the middle of the night, And so I get up, and I stumble over, and I crawl into my car, and I get in there, and I stretch out, and I'm feeling pretty good, and I fall right to sleep, and it's great. And so then the next morning I wake up. And, it's beautiful. It's a beautiful spring day. And here I am in the Ozarks. I am ready to go. And the sun is shining. And, I start to get dressed. And then I realize that I can't find my pants. And I look all through the car, and, there's no pants. What am I going to do? I'm in a Baptist churchyard and I got no pants on. And so I figured, well, I've got another pair of pants. So I sneak out of the car and I go to the back and I get my other pair of pants and I put those pants on. And okay, well, problem solved. At least that part of it's covered. And then I realized in my missing pair of pants is my wallet. And in my wallet is all my money. And it's also all my driver's license is in my wallet. And then also in the pocket of those missing pants is the keys to the car that has everything I own. So here I am in a Baptist churchyard and I've got everything there, but I can't go anywhere. I can't lock it because if I obviously, I'm going to need to explain that. So I start to get a little freaked out here. It's like, what am I going to do? And so I figured, okay, calm down. There's maybe two explanations. One is that when I had to get up in the middle of the night and crawl around, get into the car again, but maybe the wind was so strong that it blew my pants away. Maybe I dropped my pants, the wind came along and blew it away. And then I got to thinking, well, maybe the dog stole my pants. Maybe somehow now that the dog came around, it's like, really? I mean, that dog, one thing I do know is that I had my pants on when I laid down there, when I was driving the day before. I knew I had my pants, but it's okay. So, I figured, calm down. It'll be all right. And so I started to do circles around the car. I figured, the dog seemed pretty unlikely. It seemed more likely the mighty wind blew my pants somewhere. I looked under the car, didn't find them. So I went down to this ditch and I didn't see the pants in the ditch. I walked back up to the car and there's this guy sitting on a horse right next to my car. And it wasn't a big horse, but he was there, and I was like, well, this kind of thing is happening to me, and I tried to explain it to him, and I was afraid that he'd start to laugh or whatever, and he took me dead seriously. He was like, whoa, he said, I tell you, he said, I don't know what to say, but if you go down the road, there's a house down there, there's a couple of dogs down there, and maybe those are the dogs that stole your pants. So I said, okay, great. And I'm walking away and I said, well, hey, I got a posse. A man on a horse, that's a posse. So anyways, I walked down to this house. It was a great big house, huge fence, all that kind of stuff. And they had dogs, but these were attack dogs. These dogs came roaring out, and I'm not having anything to do with that. So I walked back up to my car, and I'm like standing there by my car, and I started thinking, even if I did, what is the most important thing you got here? You would think it's the money, but it's not. You would think maybe it's the key, but it's not. What's the most important thing is your ID, because you have no way to prove that this car is yours and all the stuff in the car is yours because you don't know who you are. So what am I going to do? Who am I? Where's my place in the universe? So I calmed myself down. So I said, take a couple of deep breaths. So I started to do the circle thing again. So I went up the road the other direction. There was these two guys. And they were building a house, a couple of carpenters. So once again, I explained the whole thing about the dog, about the wind, about the pants and the money, the whole thing all over again. And they sort of shook their head. They maybe they were laughing, but anyway, still, they sort of shook their head. They said, well, okay. And so they said, well, they didn't really know what they could do to help me. So I said, okay, well, thanks a lot. So I walked back to my car and I'm standing there. It's like I'm leaning against the car, like, okay, I'm stuck. And all of a sudden, these two guys, like two carpenters, the carpenters I just talked to, they walked over. And they came up to me and they said, we got thinking about you. We were sort of talking a little bit. And we said, you're in a lot of trouble here. And I said, yeah, I am kind of in a lot of trouble here. I'm really sorry, And they said, well, tell you what, we're getting ready to take, one guy he said, and besides being a carpenter, I'm also a minister. And he says, we're getting ready to take a break here. Why don't you come up to the trailer? We're going to have some lunch. You can use the phone. And, maybe there you can straighten something out. So we go up. So, we get into all three of us get in the truck, his truck, and we go up to the trailer. And And his wife is there. And his wife is giving me the old hairy eyeball because, what kind of trouble is this guy going to be? Where did you bring him? Where did you get him? And so, but she lets me use the phone, which is great. And so I call the sheriff. The sheriff says, there's no laws broken here. There's nothing I can do for you. And so then I decide, well, okay, maybe if I had the keys, where's your priorities here? If I had the keys, at least I could go someplace. So I called a Volvo dealer in Arkansas, and Arkansas has a Volvo dealer up in there in Little Rock. So I called the Volvo dealer, and they said, yeah, we could make you a set of keys if we had the VIN number. No, what's the VIN number? And then, what good's that going to do me when you think about it? Because somehow or another, I have to get to Little Rock. And then I have to pay for the new key, but I have no money. I have no transportation. Then I have to also get back to the car in order to use the key, which may or may not work. So it really didn't seem all that practical. So go back to the carpenters, and they give me a bologna sandwich, which is great because when you think about it, not only didn't I have my keys, not only didn't I have my money, not only didn't I have my ID, I didn't have any food either. So it was kind of nice to get a little bologna sandwich here. So they said, okay, we'll take you around. So they take me. So they said, we'll drive you around. We'll see if maybe we can find some dogs. At this point, we had all kind of given up on the mighty wind theory of blowing your pants into a ditch. So we started driving around. We went to a couple of places. We finally ended up at this one place, and this guy sitting on the porch. And I walk up to the porch, and it turns out it was the guy on the horse. And he says, "Oh, so you haven't found your pants yet?" And I said, "Well, no, I'm still looking." And he says, "Well, good luck. I'm sorry to hear about all that." And I said, "Well, thank you." So then I get back in the truck with the two carpenters, and they start to, you start to get a certain amount of vibe here. It's like, we're running out of options to help this guy. We kind of need to get back to work. What are we going to, they didn't say anything, but you sort of got the idea that we're running out of string here. So finally we pull up to what could have been the last house in this little circuit. And I'm looking through the windshield into the yard, and I'm looking in there, and I there's the dog. So I jump out of the car. I don't say a word. I jump out of the truck, and I go running over there, and the dog is just so happy to see me. There's this Irish setter. He's just so friendly. He says, I've been waiting here all day for you. And I said, great. So, there's the dog. And then I look, and there's my pants. My pants are right there by the doghouse, so that's great. So I grab my pants, and I look in, and inside the pants is my wallet. And inside the wallet is my money and my driver's license. And in the pocket is my keys. So I am so excited. The only thing my pipe was in there too, but I lost the tobacco. But I can live without the tobacco. That's fine. That's fine, especially under these circumstances. So I'm excited. I'm excited. So the woman who owns the dog lives in the house up the hill. She comes running down. She says, "What the hell's going on?" And I said, "I found my pants." And she goes, "Oh God, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." I said, "Don't worry, I've got my pants." And she was like so apologetic. So anyways, I get back in the truck, and the carpenter said, "Okay." So they drive me back up. They drive me back up to my car, and we get up to my car. And here's this guy walking back and forth by my car in the Baptist churchyard. So, and I look, and I realize that's the guy on the horse. That's my posse. So I jump out of the truck, and I said, "I found my pants." And he says, "Great." And so all four of us, the carpenters and the guy on the horse and I, were all dancing around the churchyard. We're just feeling so great and wonderful. And that's what happens in the Ozarks. That's the kind of people you meet there. Thank you.
Bravo, Dave.
Nice one, Dave.
Awesome, Dave.
Thank you, David. I bet you've never been so happy to find your pants since then. And we're happy you found them too.
Right.
Our next teller is Margaret French from Saratoga Springs. She's going to share a Romanian folk tale with us, when I asked her the question about if your story had a feeling, what would it be? She said, overconfidence. The title of her story is Stan Boulevan and the Dragon. Margaret, please tell us more.
Thank you, Kate. Well, Stan Boulevan loved his wife. And he went home one day after work, and there she was crying. And he said, "What's the matter?" And she said, "Oh," she said, "I must be the most unhappy woman in the world." And he said, "But why?" And she said, "Because we have no children." Well, Stan had never given the matter a whole lot of thought. But once she said it, he felt sad because she was sad. And he felt sad because they didn't have any children. So after a few days, he decided he'd go talk to the wise men who lived back and beyond. And he went and he sat down with this wise old man and he said he and his wife would like to have more children or some children. And the man said, "Nick, are you sure about that?" Are a lot of work. And you gotta be responsible for them no matter what. Like just feeding them is hard. Dan said, "I would always find a way. If I had children, I would always find a way to see that they were fed." So the old man said, "Okay, go home, you'll have children." So Stan went home and he heard them before he saw them. He heard laughing and crying and shouting. And when he got close, there were children everywhere. I mean, there were children in the front yard. There were children in the backyard. There were children at all the windows. There were children up in the apple tree. His wife came down and she had kids in both arms and kids hanging onto her skirts. Altogether, they had 100 children. Well, a few days later, things were looking desperate. They had an apple tree that gave lots of apples, but every single apple had been eaten. And they had beehives, but all the honey was gone. And they had a cow, but that cow had no more milk. And Stan knew he was going to have to find a way to get food for his family. So he said goodbye to his wife and his kids. And he took off and he traveled until he came to the place where the things that are get mixed up with the things that are not. And he decided he would spend the night there in a field where there were a lot of sheep. And he was ready to go to sleep. And just about midnight, he heard the sound of huge wings beating. And there was a shadow, a huge shadow between him and the moon. And there was that unforgettable stench of dragon. And the dragon scooped down, picked up a half a dozen sheep and flew away. And the shepherd who owned the sheep came out and he was shouting obscenities at the dragon and screaming and yelling at the dragon. The dragon just laughed. Well, to tell you the truth, Stan knew nothing about dragons. And he certainly didn't know how to get rid of a dragon, but he went to the shepherd and he said, "What would you do if I got rid of the dragon for you?" And the man said, Well, I'd give you 1 out of every 3 sheep. The way he's going, that dragon's going to take them all if I don't find some way to get rid of them. So this seemed like a good deal to Stan. But once again, what did he know about getting rid of dragons? He'd never gotten rid of a dragon. He'd never seen a dragon. He lived in the world that is, not in the world that isn't. But the next night, he was there, was standing up in the middle of the field, waiting for the dragon. And at midnight, he heard the sound of huge wings. And he saw the shadow that came between the moon and him. And he smelled the stench of dragon. And the dragon dropped right in front of him. And Stanley said, "It is I, Stan Bolivan. I sleep on the mountaintops. I eat rocks for breakfast. And if you touch a single sheep, you will die." Well, the dragon didn't take him entirely seriously. But Stan had brought some cheese to eat along the way, and he had dropped it on the ground, and he picked it up and he said, "And I can squeeze buttermilk out of a rock." And he squeezed and squeezed till buttermilk dripped out of that piece of cheese. And he said to the dragon, "Pick up a stone. See if you can do the same." And the dragon, he picked up a stone and he squeezed it until it crumbled into dust, but no buttermilk. And now the dragon, he took Stan a little more seriously. After all, here was a man who slept on the mountaintops, who ate rocks for breakfast, and who could squeeze buttermilk out of a stone. And he had seen him do it. He thought to himself,
"You've got 400,000 pounds in pigs,
I'm sorry, would somebody mute themselves?
diamonds, and the other 100,000 in
So the dragon thought to himself, I better talk to my mother about this. She'll know what to do. So he said to Stan, "I have this idea. My mother is looking for someone to do a little work for her, 3 days, 3 sacks of gold. Are you interested?" And Stan said yes. Although how he was able to deal with 2 dragons instead of 1, I'm not sure. But he and the dragon
merchants from
went over to the dragon's place. And
moon as owls and croaked in fury. There would be no more need. Gold. The countess's bounty had been shared.
I'm sorry, but would somebody mute themselves? I'm kidding. And the dragon went to his mother. And he said, "I met this guy. He's very dangerous. He sleeps on the mountaintops. He eats rocks for breakfast. He can squeeze buttermilk out of a stone. I saw him do it." The mother was not very impressed, and she doubted the whole thing. But she said, "Put him in the bedroom above the kitchen, and tomorrow we'll deal with him." Well, the next morning, after breakfast, the mother says, "Now, here's what I'd like the 2 of you to do. I'd like to see which one of you could throw that spear further." Now, the spear was at least 20 feet long. And There was no way Stan could even pick it up. But he walked out with the dragon, and the dragon picked it up and took it out. He threw it 3 miles. So Stan and the dragon went to where the dragon had, where the spear had landed. And Stan sat down. Dragon says, "What are you doing? You gotta throw the spear." And Stan said, "I'm waiting for the sun to go down." Dragon said, "What do you mean you're waiting for the sun to go down?" He said, "Well, I'm so powerful that I fear that if I were to throw the spear while the sun is up, I might accidentally hit the sun and your spear would be burned to a crisp." Well, the dragon didn't want this family heirloom to be burned to a crisp. So he tried to bargain with Stan. And he said, "How about I throw the spear for you?" And Stan said, "No, when I say I'll do a thing, I mean it." And the dragon says, "Well, how about I'll throw the spear. I'll tell my mother that you threw the spear, and I'll give you an extra bag of gold." Stan said, "I suppose that would be all right." And that's what they did. And that was day 1. Now, day 2, the dragon mother, she had other ideas. She said, "Now, today I want the 2 of you to bring water from the river. And there are those 12 barrels over there. You can use them." Well, the dragon scooped up the barrels and they were off to the river. But while the dragon was filling up barrels with water, Stan was drawing diagrams in the dirt. And the dragon said, "Look, what are you doing? We got to get this water back." And Stan said, "I'm not going to carry the water barrel by barrel. I'm making plans to move the river." Now, the dragon hated this idea. He said, "Well, the river has always been here and we don't want the river moved. We just want water." Stan said, No, I'll do what I feel is best. And I feel it's best to move the river. Well, it took a while, but the dragon was eventually persuaded that he could move all the water himself and give Stan an extra bag of gold and tell his mother that Stan had done it. And that was day 2. Now, on day 3, the mother had another idea, and she said, "Now, today, what I want the 2 of you to do is bring firewood from the forest." So off they went. And in just a minute or 2, that dragon had chopped down 12 tall trees and cut them up into logs. And Stan had climbed to the top of a tree, and he tied a rope around the very top of the tree. And the dragon said, "No, what are you doing?" Stan said, "I am not going to chop down the trees one by one. I'm going to tie a rope around all the trees in the forest. Then I can pick up the whole forest at once and bring the forest back to the house." And the dragon really hated that idea. He wanted the forest to stay where it was. And after a lot of persuasion, he was able to convince Stan to let him do all the work, the dragon, to tell his mother that Stan had done it, and to give him an extra bag of gold. And that was day 3. And after supper, Stan went up to bed. And on that day, the dragon told his mother everything about what had really happened. And his mother said, I figured something was fishy about all of this. You've been taken. You've been taken. You've been bamboozled. She says, we'll fix him. She said, take your club, go upstairs and smash his head in. Give him a little time so we know he's asleep. So while they gave him a little time, Stan, who'd heard the whole thing, because he was in the room right over where they were talking, he went out the back door, got the pig's trough, hauled it up, put it on his bed, covered it with blankets and things, so in the dark, it sort of looked like it could be him. Got under the bed and pretended to be asleep, snoring loudly. The dragon tiptoed upstairs as quietly as a dragon can tiptoe. He walked into the bedroom. He took the club and he smashed the place where he thought that Stan's head should be. And Stan said, oh! And the dragon crept back downstairs. The next morning, Stan woke up. He had made sure he got that pig's trough back outside and he'd cleaned up the room. He went into the kitchen and he said, good morning. And they said, how'd you sleep? Oh, see, he said, very well. He said, I felt like a mosquito or something got me in the middle of the night, but no big deal. And the dragon said to his mother, he said, I smashed my club on his head. Well, now the mother was convinced. Both the dragon and the dragon's mother believed in the extraordinary power of Stan Bolivan, and they wanted to get rid of him. But Stan said he thought he'd like to stay on a bit, but with a little extra gold, he could be persuaded. But he said, it's embarrassing to walk home with all that gold. If someone would carry it for me. Truth be told, gold is heavy. Stan couldn't carry all that gold home. So the dragon said, I'll carry it for you. I'll carry it for you. And they took all those bags of gold and they walked back towards Stan's house. And when they got close, Stan began to worry. He really didn't want the dragon to know exactly where he lived because he might come back and want his money. So when he got fairly close, he said to the dragon, why don't you just put the gold by the side of the road and I'll take care of it for the rest of the way. And as the dragon was laying the gold beside the road, out from Stan's house and around the corner came the children. Stan had said, you probably don't want to meet my children anyway. He said, they get a little rambunctious and they might hurt you. And all those children who were pretty hungry by then, they had knives in their right hands. They had forks in their left hands, and they were saying, dragon meat, we want dragon meat. And the dragon turned around and took off and was never seen again. But Stan and his wife and their 100 children and the 1,000 grandchildren that they one day had lived happily ever after. Thank you.
Oh,
Excellent.
oh, thank you, Margaret, for that delightful visit to the world that isn't. No, the the 100 children was pretty frightening. I must admit. The dragons, strangely enough, not so much. Our last teller in the first section is Joe Doolittle. He's going to take us to the world that was, i.e., an historical story. And when I asked him what his story would feel like, he said it would feel holy. But let me spell it for you, HOLE-Y. So not holy like sacred, not holy like the whole thing. Holy like a hole in your pocket? Like a hole in the ground? Well, Joe will tell us and we'll know.
Well, thank you. And it is a holy story, and it takes place in 1777, in August of that year. The American Army was in a situation. They were based here in upstate New York, and General Burgoyne, the British general, had an army of 8,000 coming down from Lake Champlain, and the Americans were preparing to meet them with fortifications at Saratoga. And off to the west, there was another British army under a guy named St. Leger besieging Fort Stanwix, which was a fort that had been rebuilt by the Americans to defend the Mohawk Valley. And there was even suspicion that maybe the British were going to come from the south too. So the Americans had a council of war about what to do. What should the sequence be? And there was some reluctance to send any military means away from the defense of Saratoga. But at that meeting in the Van Schaik house in Cohoes, they decided to send 2 regiments of light infantry under Daniel Morgan from Virginia and Henry Dearborn from New Hampshire. And to lead that contingent to the relief of Fort Stanwix, they nominated Benedict Arnold, who was one of the best generals in the Army at the time. He went on to foul things. And they set out right up the Mohawk Valley to towards Fort Stanwix. And it was a 3 or 4 day forced march. At the other end of the valley, where the British were surrounding Fort Stanwix, there had been a battle at Oriskany. And the Americans under General Herkimer, who were going to relieve the fort, were ambushed. And it was a terribly vicious battle, and it went on all day. And the people in the fort had realized there was something going on because the Indians and the British and the Loyalists went off into the woods and they heard the battle. And the number 2 in command of the fort was ordered to go out and retrieve all the goods of the British and the Loyalists and the Indians. And they went out and they gathered their cooking pots and their food and everything. And these soldiers and Indians who had been fighting tooth and nail all day came back to their camp after stopping the Americans. And their camps were just devoid of everything. They were very upset. So the British couldn't take on the valley and raise it, if you will, because they were trying to recruit the people who lived in the valley to their cause. So they sent a scout, and the scout was Walter Butler. And Walter Butler was a handsome dandy. He was the son of one of the biggest loyalists in the valley who had worked for Sir William Johnson. And he took a sidekick, kind of a storyteller, happy-go-lucky guy named Joost van Schuyler. and they were going to go down into the valley and reconnoiter and begin to talk up the idea of people joining the British cause. Now, where did they do this? They did it in a tavern, Krause's Tavern in what is now near Herkimer, New York. And they were in their tavern talking things up and having their pints, and they heard a commotion outside. And they looked out the door, and there was an army. There was an army, and the leader of the army was coming right in the door, and it was, everybody said, that's Benedict Arnold, and Walter Butler was there, and he was well known. And Benedict Arnold looked at and said, "Are you Walter Butler?" And Walter was caught dead to rights. And Benedict Arnold said, "Get a rope. We're going to hang this traitor." No. Well, everybody got very concerned because Walter Butler was so well known, you just couldn't take a rope and hang him. But he was also on the other side, and it needed to do something. So the caucus that day was not to hang Walter Butler. Now, meanwhile, Walter Butler's friend, Josef Schuyler, he was a little worried, but he wasn't Walter Butler, and people knew him, and he was probably not going to have to worry about anything until Benedict Arnold looked at him and said, "I hear you're a storyteller. I hear you're a storyteller. Here's what we're going to do. Take off his coat." So they took off his coat, and they nailed it to the tavern side, and they shot bullet holes in it. And then he says to Josef Schuyler, he says, "You're going to go back up to that camp, and you see those troops over there, those tall guys with the rifles? Those are Morgan's riflemen. You tell everybody that I've got more soldiers than leaves on the trees, and they're armed, and they're mean, and we're coming for them. And if they don't know what's good for, they'll lay down their arms. And if you don't do that, I'll track you down, and I'm going to eat your heart for breakfast." Well, Yost, being a, he kind of knew what his job had to be, or he'd be eating his breakfast. So Josef Schuyler goes back up to the British camp surrounding Fort Stanwix, and he tells the story just like Arnold told him. And he shows him the bullets in his coat, how he got away, and Walter got captured, and they didn't hang him, but they're going to. And it's going to be really rough when those guys in the long rifles and their tomahawks, and those other guys with the cross belts and their muskets, when they get here, it's going to be trouble, guys. It's going to be trouble. Well, first of all, the Mohawks had been really beat up at the Battle of Oriskany, and they hadn't had much to eat, and they thought the whole thing was just turning south. So they decided right then and there to go home. And when the Indians left, then the Tory troops left, then the British troops left. And the next day, Benedict Arnold led his contingent into Fort Stanwix, and there was no British army present. They had gone back north to Canada.
Yeah.
There was no battle. The fort was relieved, and the story had carried the day. And Arnold and his men ate, slept overnight, and started the force march back to the Van Schaik House at Gahoes. And 2 weeks later, those same two regiments, Morgan's riflemen and Colonel Dearman's light infantry, led the counterattack and swept the day at Freeman's Farm, the first Battle of Saratoga. And there was no story that day that could avert that battle. And that battle was a draw. And it was the first time in our revolution that the American army had stood up to the British. And it was not to be the last. But we all remember the day that Story saved the day and won the battle. Thank you.
Very
And that's almost true, that story. It's just about the way it happened.
So thank you for your semi-historical story. It was hysterical in parts. Thank you. Okay. Well, it's getting time towards intermission. And I'd just like to share a few slides with you. We have a suggested donation of $12 per performance. You can pay online or send a check made out to Story Circle. And I believe Claire is putting this information again in the chat. But we realize that many people have been financially impacted by COVID-19. So any amount you are able to donate will be greatly appreciated. Proctor's, the Performing Arts Center, where we normally perform, is graciously handling our online donations. This performance is being recorded and will be available on Proctor's Open Stage Media's Arts and Education channel. And it'll also be available on our own website, www.storycircleatproctors.org, and you click on Word Plays. Now, on the top of every page of our website, it shows you where the next virtual shows are going to be. So there'll be Stories Around the Steeple on March 19th, and Storytelling Night at Cafe Lena on March 23rd. And so welcome back to the second half of Word Plays for more tales about Bamboozled. Our next teller is from Castleton on Hudson, Fran Combs Berger. She's telling us a second Irish folk tale. You know, St. Patrick's Day is coming up. I am wearing green, a shade of green, in honor of that. Fran is suitably apparelled also. Her story is called Seamus and the Blackthorn Bush. And the feeling associated with this story is prickly. Fran.
Well, to be precise, it's not just Seamus, it's Seamus O'Malley in the Blackthorn Bush. And it was a moonlit night. I think a full moon it was. And Seamus O'Malley's wife said, "Mind your P's and Q's at the tavern then. I'm not having you home drunk again." But it was easier said than done. And so by after 9 and going on 10, Seamus decided it was time to come home. And his P's and Q's actually were quite full. It hadn't been minded at all. So he headed out and tripped coming down the steps and steadied himself on the road and got his bearings, and then on he tramped and was making a quite a nice little pace for himself and whistling, and he looked up at the moon and he tripped right over a root and landed face down on the road, don't you know, and he shook his head, and right in front of his eyes, you know, right there, and there was a wee little man with a red scarf about his neck and a little wee hat, and Seamus, deep in his cups though he was, knew enough to snatch that little fella right in his hand, because were you to catch one of the wee folk, they had to yield their gold to you. "Let me go," said the little man with his face wrinkly and getting red. He was so angry. "Let me go, Seamus O'Malley, you're not but a drunk." "Drunk I might be," said Seamus, splattering over the poor little man. "Drink I may be, but I know you cannot be going until you give me your gold." And he bit Seamus on his finger. "Oh," said Seamus, but he didn't let go. He simply clasped his other hand over and nursed his poor finger. "Oh, you're a mean little one, aren't you?" "I'm no meaner than you, Seamus O'Malley, not at all. But I want to be let go, and so it is. I'll show you me gold. Just look to your right. And Seamus looked to his right, and didn't you know he was right next to an entire field of blackthorn bushes. Oh, now they're very, very sharp indeed. Oh, well, you're showing me naught but blackthorn bushes. Hi, hi, said the wee man. But there's the gold under one. You've got to show me which one, said Seamus O'Malley. All right, stand up then, you slop. And he stood up and dusted himself off a bit, and he swayed his way over into the blackthorn bushes, and didn't he get about in the middle of the field, and the little man said, right here, this is the one. Now this is where you dig. This is where me gold is. And Seamus looked about and said, but I'm in the middle of the blackthorn bushes, and all around there's naught but that which looks just exactly like everything else. And how am I to tell what I'm after? Because I'm nothing to dig with, and I'm going to have to go home and get myself a hoe or a shovel. And I don't know, what's you going to do? Well, the wee little man was somewhat more articulate than Seamus was. And he said, "What, you great fool? Don't you see me little red scarf? I'll take me little red scarf and let's tie it around the blackthorn bush, and you'll know which one to come back to. The moon's full, you should be able to see, even you, blind drunk." Well, said Seamus, well, that seems a good idea. But I don't want to let you go. Well, what am I to do? I told you where my gold is. You got nothing to dig with, and there's my own scarf marking it. Well, you have a point. You've shown me your gold. All right, I'm going to set you here. You just stay right with it. Well, I've no other place to go till I get my scarf back now, do I? Well, I suppose not. And so Seamus wove his way home, and by the time he found himself a hoe to dig with, shovel not being available, he was a little soberer, and back he went, walking in the moonlight toward the blackthorn bushes, and then thinking to himself, well, now, isn't this a miracle, and isn't it wonderful, and my wife will forgive me when I bring home a bag of gold, and there's nothing to worry about, and aren't I just a lucky man? And then Seamus gets back to that entire beautiful field of blackthorn bushes, and he looks at the moon, and he looks down, and he looks again. And then the curses coming out of his mouth are none that you're going to be able to hear, for they were way too foul for human speech. For every single one of those blackthorn bushes had a wee red scarf about it. And it'd take you all night the next day, and perhaps the rest of your life, to figure out which one it was. So Seamus dragged that hoe back home and took quite a yelling from his wife. No gold to be had. And that's Seamus O'Malley and the blackthorn tree.
Once again, the leprechaun wins. Do they ever give up their gold? I don't think so.
Not willingly.
No. So thank you for taking us back in time, Fran. And now Marnie Gillard from Schenectady is going to give us a change of pace. She's going to recite a poem by Amy Lowell. The poem is called Patterns. But when I asked Marnie what the feeling associated with the story, the poem is, she said the feeling of being in a straitjacket. Marnie.
Well, I have to introduce this poem with a little bit of a story that's just story. When I was coming into high school, I wanted so badly to be part of a drama club, to be, in plays. Only it was a brand new high school, and they'd ordered lots and lots of things, and it was a gorgeous building, but no one ever ordered the curtain for the stage. And the drama director that my brother knew very well because he was older than me and he'd been in plays, he said, Marnie, Mr. Quirk is having a nervous breakdown because he doesn't have a curtain. You just do what you want, do what he tells you to do. And next year, you'll probably get to be in a play. Because Mr. Quirk was giving us all these odd things like short stories from books to act out as a group or a poem to act out as a group. I learned the Mountain Whippoorwill, which I do tell all the way through. And some of you know, have heard that. I earned it, but I only had tiny little parts. I didn't have any good parts. The boys had all the solo lines and it was a group choral reading. But I did it, and I did follow Jimmy's direction, my brother's direction, and I just tried to do my best. And sophomore year, the second year, you know, everything was back to normal and there was a great drama club. And Mr. Quirk came up to me in the hallway one day and he said, Marnie, you love speaking aloud. It's very clear. We have something called a contest, sort of a, you know, like I know you dive, you go to diving contests. We have things like that. And you could get a poem or maybe a short story that you liked and work on it and perform it and be in the contest. Would you like to do that? And I was, Mr. Quirk, thank you. Yes, I'll find something. I'll find something that'll be right for me. And I looked through my language arts, you know, high school anthology, and there was this poem. Now, I can't believe looking back that I chose this poem as a 15-year-old, but I could see that this young woman was bamboozled by life. And I still love it to this day. I walk down the garden paths and all the daffodils are blowing and the bright blue squills. I walk down the patterned garden paths in my stiff, correct brocade. With my powdered hair and jeweled fan, I too am a rare pattern as I wander down the patterned paths. My dress is richly figured and the train makes a pink and purple stain on the gravel and the thrift of the borders. Just a plate of current fashion, tripping by in high-heeled ribbon shoes. Not a softness anywhere about me, only whalebone and brocade. And I sink on a seat in the shade of a lime tree, for my passion wars against this stiff brocade. The daffodils and the squills flutter in the breeze as they please. But I weep, for the lime tree is in blossom, and one small flower has dropped upon my bosom. And the splashing of the water drops in the marble basin come down the garden paths. The dripping never stops. Underneath my stiffened gown is the softness of a woman bathing in a marble basin. A basin in the midst of hedges grown so thick she cannot see her lover hiding there, but she guesses he is near. And the sliding of the water seems the stroking of a dear hand upon her. Oh, what is summer in a fine brocaded gown? I should like to see it lying in a heap upon the ground. I would be the pink and silver as I ran along the garden paths, and he would stumble after, bewildered by my laughter. I should see the sun flashing from his sword hilt and the buckles on his shoes. I would choose to lead him in a maze along the garden paths, a bright and laughing maze for my heavy-booted lover, until he caught me in the shade, and the buttons on his waistcoat bruised my body as he clasped me, aching, melting, unafraid. With the shadows of the leaves and the sun drops and the plopping of the water drops all about us in the open afternoon. Oh, I am very like to swoon in the weight of this brocade. For the sun sifts through the shade. Underneath the fallen blossom in my bosom is a letter I have hid. It was brought to me this morning by a rider from the Duke. Madam, we regret to inform you that Lord Harswell died in action Thursday night. As I read it, the letters squirmed like snakes. Any answer? Said my footman. No, I told him to see that the messenger takes some refreshment. No answer. And I walked into the garden, up and down the patterned paths in my stiff, correct brocade. And the blue and yellow flowers stood up proudly in the sun, each one. I stood upright too, held rigid to the pattern by the stiffness of my gown. Up and down I walked, up and down. In a month, he would have been my husband. In a month, here, underneath this lime, we would have broke the pattern. He for me, and I for him. He as colonel, I as lady, on this shady seat. He had a whim that sunlight carried blessings. And I answered, it shall be as you have said. But now he is dead. In summer and in winter, I shall walk up and down the patterned garden paths in my stiff brocaded gown. The squills and the daffodils will give place to pillared roses, then to asters, then to snow. I shall go up and down in my gown gorgeously arrayed, boned and stayed. And the softness of my body will be guarded from embrace by each button, hook, and lace. For the man who should loose me is dead, fighting with the Duke in Flanders in a pattern called war. Christ, what are patterns for? Amy Lowell, Patterns. Thank you, Mr. Quirk, for asking. And thank you, Jimmy, for warning me. Do what he tells you to do.
Well, thank you so much, Marnie, for sharing that with us.
Thank you. It was a great delight.
Our next teller is Siri Allison from Salem. She's bringing to us a folktale from the Punjab called The Story of the King and Four Girls. When I asked her about the feeling, she said her story feels like sheer shimmering silk. Siri.
First, I want to say thank you, Marnie. Oh man, that was really something. That was really something. Yeah, my story I got from a book called Outfoxing Fear by Kathleen Reagan, and she got it from someone who I think must have collected it in what must now be Pakistan in 1892, and I have updated it a bit. Once there was a young king. He was 20 years old, and he had not expected to be king so soon, if ever, because he was second in line to the throne. But, well, you know how life is. First the king, and then his elder brother had unexpectedly died, and he suddenly found himself king. And he wasn't ready. And he had no friendly person to teach him what he needed to know. The royal advisors and ministers, they condescended to him. And the visiting ambassadors, they flattered him. And the common people were afraid of him. And so he felt very alone in his position and very aware of every mistake he made. But he loved his country. He loved his people. And so every morning he climbed up on that throne and he sat up straight and he did the very best job he knew how. That was every day. And at night, the best job he knew how was to cast off his royal robes and dress as a peasant and walk the streets of his city to see what he could learn about the people. Well, this one evening, he was walking through a narrow street, and under a tree, he saw four girls, maybe 15 years old or so, and they were deep in earnest conversation. So he stopped to listen, and one of the girls was saying, "Of all the tastes in the world, the best one is meat." No, silly, said a second one. "Of all the tastes in the world, the best one is wine." "Oh no," said a third. "Of all the tastes in the world, the best is love." "I don't think so," said the fourth. "Meat, wine, and love are all very good, no doubt, but the sweetest taste in the world is telling lies." Well, just then a mother called, and the girls all got up and scattered. Each one went to her own home. And the king reached in his pocket and pulled out a piece of chalk that he always carried with him. And with the chalk, he marked the doors of the houses that the girls had gone into. And the next morning, he sent his chief minister to that street, to the chalked doors, to arrange with the parents that the girls should come to the palace and speak with him. Well, later that day, there in his throne room stood 4 terrified girls. "Hello," he said to them. No answer. "Tell me," he said, "what were you talking about last night under the tree?" "Oh, sire," they said, "we said nothing about you. Really, we didn't say anything bad about you at all, we promise." "I didn't mean that," said the king. "What I want to know is what you were discussing." "Well," said the first girl, "I said that of all the tastes in the world, the best one is meat." The king looked at her special headdress and he said, "Aren't you a Bahabra?" Bahabras are a very strict sect of the Jain, Jain religion. When she nodded, he said, "Bahabras are very scrupulous vegetarians. What do you know of the taste of meat?" "Well, it's true," she said, "I have never actually tasted meat, but I observe that when people go into the butcher shop near my house and buy meat, they never waste a bit of it. And then when they finally give the bones to the dogs chew and chew on the bones, and then the crows come when the dogs are finished and they carry the bones away, and then after the crows are done, the ants swarm all over the bones. So meat must taste exceedingly delicious." "You're right," said the king. "Meat does taste good." And he looked at the second girl. "You're not a Bahabra, are you?" "Oh, no, sire. My father is an imam, a Muslim cleric. And I say that the best taste in the world is wine." The king said, "No imam will let his daughter drink wine. What do you know of the taste of it?" "Well, it's true, I have never actually tasted wine, but I do my lessons on the roof of our house, and down below there's a wine shop. And I see that very well-dressed people go into the wine shop and drink wine. And when they come out, they can hardly walk. They stagger, they run into the wall, they fall down. And the first time I saw it, I said, 'Oh, those poor people, they will never drink wine again.' But I was mistaken, because the very next day, the very next night, they came and they did the very same thing. So from this, I deduce that the taste of wine is exceedingly pleasant." "You're right," said the king. "That is good reasoning. The taste of wine is quite fine." "What about you?" he said to the third girl. "Oh," she said, "I am the daughter of a bard," that is a storyteller, "and I think the best taste in the world is love." "You're very young," said the king. "What do you know of love?" "Well, it's true, I am too young for love, but my father tells beautiful stories about it, and my mother has many lovers." Now here you see the reputation that storytellers and people in the performing arts had. "My mother has many lovers, and when my little brother was born, my mother was in such agony, she feared for her life. But after the birth, well, she welcomed her lovers the same as before. So the taste of love must be sublime." "That is what they say," said the king. And he turned to the fourth girl. She said, "I'm the daughter of a farmer, and I say the best, sweetest taste in the world is telling lies, because they get you out of trouble." "Heaven forbid," said the king. "Telling lies is very wrong. They get you into trouble." "It's true, sire, it is wrong to tell lies. But there are times when our mouths find those lying words so irresistibly, temptingly sweet. Why, you yourself may tell a lie someday." "I will not," said the king. "Sire," said the girl, "if you will give me 6 months' time and 2 lakhs of silver coins. A lakh is 100,000. 6 months' time and 2 lakhs of silver coins, I will prove my words. I accept your challenge, said the king, and he sent the girls home, each with a very generous gift for their families, and for the farmer's daughter, 200,000 silver coins. 6 months later, he called her back. Oh, sire, she said, I hope you don't mind, but I have spent the money in a different way than we agreed. You see, shortly after our meeting here, I had the most extraordinary experience. I saw God. And I was so moved by this that I was inspired to use the money to build a house for God. And I've built this house deep in the forest. And if you will accompany me there now, you can see God. Oh, the king came with her, bringing with him his chief minister. And after traveling for a few hours, they came to this clearing in the forest, and there, was a beautiful house, not large, but exquisitely designed and proportioned. It had these smooth adobe wood walls painted white and a sort of domed roof and an ornately carved heavy wooden door. God dwells here, she said, and you will see him now. But he only shows himself to one person at a time, and only to people who have deep integrity, who are honest through and through. I'll go first, said the chief minister, and he pushed open that heavy wooden door and went inside. Oh, the inside was even more beautiful than the outside. Silk tapestries on the wall, colorful mosaic tiled floor with thick Persian carpets, silk pillows, soft and embroidered, carved wood and jade. But though the chief minister wandered from room to room, he didn't see God. Oh, he thought, well, it is part of my job to bend the truth and make secret deals with this one and that one, but I can't let the king know that, so I'll have to pretend that I saw God. So when he opened the door, he said, God was magnificent. Did he speak to you? Asked the king. Oh, yes. What did he say? He told me not to divulge his words. Oh, said the king. And he pushed open the heavy door and he went inside, and he also was awed by the beauty in there. But though he searched everywhere, peering behind the tapestries, crawling along those heavy Persian carpets into every corner, he did not see God anywhere. Oh, he thought, if I admit this, then the minister will tell the whole staff of the palace, the court, the girl will tell all the peoples that I don't have enough integrity. And then they will never respect me as king. So I'll have to pretend. So when he opened the door, he fixed what he hoped was a transcendent expression on his face, and he said, God was beyond words. Oh, I'm so glad you saw him, said the girl. What, said the king? Of course I saw God. You don't think your king is dishonest, do you? The chief minister had begun to worry that God might have told something about him. So he said, did he say anything to you? Oh, yes, said the king. We had a nice long talk. The girl folded her arms. Your Majesty, she said, have you fallen for those sweet, tempting words? God is a spirit and he cannot be contained in any house. I find it highly doubtful that you actually saw God. The king was confused for a moment, and then, he remembered the challenge. But instead of being angry, he laughed. He laughed at the fun of the game. He laughed at himself. He laughed with the joy that someone was finally treating him like a real person. The girl said, "Sire, we poor people sometimes have to lie to save our lives, but you, who are the most powerful person in the land who had nothing to lose, you reached for those sweet words. And in order to convince us that you were honest, you told a lie." Well, she was wrong that he had nothing to lose, but she was right about everything else. And at this point, the chief minister had to admit that he also had lied. And after he'd admitted that, well, he couldn't very well condescend to the king anymore. And when they went back to the palace, his new attitude spread through the staff, and it was all much better for the king. And because this is a folktale, you know the rest of what happened. The king eventually married his smart young friend, and as king and queen, they ruled judiciously and generously for many, many years. And that little house in the forest, that became their weekend getaway place. And that's the end of the story.
Thank
Good
you,
job.
Siri.
Great.
Oh,
Uh,
great, great, great. It was wonderful, Siri. Thank you.
Very satisfying, very, very satisfying, and very well told. Thank you, Siri. Now, to end this performance, we have Mary Murphy, a storyteller from Albany, sharing with us another Irish folktale of a different sort than we've heard earlier, the Countess Kathleen O'Shea. And the feeling associated with the story is spring. Mary Murphy.
Thank you very much, Kate. At one time, as I think most people know, there was a dreadful famine in Ireland, and many people were dying. It was a pity to see children standing by the roadside as thin as scarecrows, holding up their hands for a drop of milk or a crust of bread, anything to keep them alive. In winter, it was even worse, for the poor had no warm food inside them to keep them from starving and to keep the frost and the snow from hurting them. Well, at this time, there were two merchants, and they were walking about the countryside day after day, and no one knew what they were about because they neither bought nor sold any goods. Now, they walked so much, they were watching people, noting their pitiful condition, but showing no signs of pity whatsoever. And some people eventually said that they saw the merchants flying toward the moon in the form of owls. And others said that they came from under the wave and were sent by the evil one. Now, during the day, they had glittering eyes, and everyone said that they wore gloves because they had talons instead of fingers. But eventually, everyone found out what the merchants were about. One day in a great town, they spread out a Persian rug in the middle of the square, and they put down a platform, and they both stepped up. And they announced that they were going to trade gold if people would sell them what they wanted. Wow. Many people were dying at this time, and more were on the point of death. Was it any wonder that they wanted to get food and money to buy food? They went scurrying to find out what the merchants had that they could trade for gold. And when they got there, there were thousands others already there, thousands upon thousands of people. And once again, they stepped up on their platform, and the merchants announced, "We have come to trade gold if people will sell us souls." Now, the soul will be awarded money according to the transparency and the value of the soul. They unrolled a scroll and they began to read. "Men and women who are older will get 50 gold pieces," they said. Young men and young women will get 300 gold pieces apiece. And a child will receive 500 pounds of gold. Now, it's no reflection on these people that they were very tempted by this enticing offer. God knows they were half mad anyway, with the people dying around them, their own families, their neighbors, everyone. First one, and then another, and then another, and another put up their hands and said that they would like to talk to the men from under the wave. Soon there was a line that went all around the town waiting to speak to the merchants. Now at this time, there lived in Ireland a woman named Countess Kathleen O'Shea. She was very wealthy, and she lived in a mansion beside a green lake, surrounded by a forest. She was a great beauty. She was tall, and she had sapphire eyes. And when she walked, it was like a swan sailing on a lake. So graceful were her movements. Now, the Countess Kathleen was married to a great Polish prince, but he died one summer. He drowned in the lake. And so she took back her maiden name, and she lived like a nun in a cell, except that she was surrounded by great wealth and beauty. When she heard what was happening to her people, she suffered a great heartbreak. And she knew that not only would they be now starving to death, but they would be selling their souls in order to get some money to buy food. And she could not accept that. She said she would do whatever it takes so that the evil one would get no more souls for his region. She called in her servant one day, and she said, "I want you to tell me how much I've got." Well, he went away and came back a few days later with the account books in his arms, and she said, "How much have I got?" And he said, "You got 500,000 pounds of gold." And she said, "Well, how is that made up, in money or in land?" And he said, "Well, you've got 400,000 in jewelry, in diamonds, in ranches, in lakes, in property, and the other 100,000 is your mansion and your gold bullion." Well, she told him to sell everything except to keep the mansion and the gold bullion so they'd have something to live on. All the rest of this to be sold and the money distributed to the poor. And when the people heard that the Countess was distributing her money, they were overjoyed because they knew now they could buy enough food until next year, and they wouldn't starve until the crops came in next year. But the merchants, they were furious. They were furious, and they flew by night toward the moon, croaking in anger. Now there would be no more need of evil gold, thanks to the bounty of Countess Kathleen O'Shea. By day they walked in human form, but they could find no solution that would appease their master, the evil one, until they got a plan. And they decided that if they were to steal the Countess's gold, she would not be able to help the people anymore if there was another famine next year, perhaps. And so one night they snuck into the mansion and they put a spell on the Countess Kathleen as soon as they saw her. And she was about to cry out the name of God, because that would dissolve those demons. But they paralyzed her throat, and she couldn't speak. They pushed her aside, and they went and looked, and they rooted around the mansion until they found the gold, and they took it away. And then it was very easy for them, the next year, to poison the crops. And the people had no recourse except for their evil gold. They rubbed their taloned fingers in anticipation of all the souls they would gather for their master, the evil one from under the wave. But then, the Countess did something that no one ever thought she would do. She decided to sell her own soul, if those demons would give her enough to save her people. And so one day, weren't they astounded as this beautiful woman comes right up to them and says, "How much will you give for a soul?" And they said, "Well, dear lady, it depends. The value of a soul is found by its transparency." "How much for my soul?" "Yours?" "Yours, dear lady?" "Yes, mine." Well, those blackguards were so delighted that they would have such power over her and over the world that they gave £1,000,000 Irish pounds of gold for that soul. And the Countess knew that that would be enough. That would be enough to save her people, no matter what those demons did. And so she accepted. She accepted, even though she knew that she would spend an eternity in hell. Well, as soon as she got the money, she sent her servant out to distribute it to everyone. And oh, it was a lot of money indeed. And then from then on, those people were rejoicing because they knew that no matter what the demons did in their lifetimes, they would be saved and their children would be saved. Now, see, they did not know. They did not know what the Countess had done, the terrible thing, the terrible price that she was about to pay. The only one that knew that was her servant, the one who she sent out to distribute the money, the one who wept when he found her not long after that, cold and dead in the mansion. And he went out and told the people that the Countess had died, and they were full of lamentation. But he also told them that she had sold her soul to save theirs. And then in multitudes they came and wept at her grave. But as they did, an angel came above them and told these people that Countess Kathleen was not in hell. She was in heaven. She had sold her soul to save her people, and God had declared the sale null and void. And so the demons lost anyway. And the greatest poet in Ireland has said of the Countess Kathleen, she walks now on the floor of peace.
Oh, whoa.
Ah,
Great.
Thank you.
Wonderful.
thank you so much, Mary.
Oh, you're welcome. My pleasure.
Thank you. That's great.
That was
That was one of those stories that you go, how is it going to end? It doesn't look good, but phew,
For Catholic especially, it looks pretty bad.
looks pretty bad. Right on the brink of hell. Yes, you
Right.
brought us there. So I'd like to thank all of you tellers today for bringing us so many different places with so many different feelings. A big round of applause for you all. And thank you to our technical guru, Claire Nolan, who kept us in the spotlight. And to all of you who came and listened to our stories. We gratefully appreciate that you do come and listen. Now, before we go, I just want to remind you that we have one more performance this season. And actually, Mary Murphy's story could have applied to this one, cliffhangers. But so on Sunday, April 11th, some of our tellers from today, Siri Allison, David Bain, Margaret French, and Mary Murphy, will be joined by Claire Beadlestone, Linda McKenney, Sandy Schumann, and myself. So this ends our performance of Bamboozled.